If you feel like you understand the importance of diving inwards, of processing emotions and trauma, and have that really intellectual understanding of how it will help heal your pain and move you forward in life, but it feels like you're lacking but how? How do I do this? What does that even mean? Then this episode is for you. Today, I want to share one of my absolute favorite tools that I have developed after 10 years of working with the body, working with a mind-body connection, and helping myself and others actually bridge that gap between the knowing and the doing. Because as we have covered, without the doing, we will get stuck in a vicious cycle of endlessly analyzing, but not actually moving forward and healing. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Unweaving Chronic Pain Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andrea Moore, founder of the Whole Self Integration Method, and I am here to help empower those who are ready to expand their life back out again after it has been shrinking due to chronic pain. I am here to guide those who are ready to step out into life, live it with all the ups and downs, with more ease, joy, and passion. All right, in this episode, we are going to be covering a tool that I developed that is one of my favorite go-to tools. Learning a process that was similar to this that I have since modified to work in a way that I find is more attuned to a brain that is more analytical and perfectionist, and sometimes doesn't do so well with the more like ethereal woo-woo type stuff. I don't know if you're like me, like I love stuff like that, but sometimes if it feels too like woo-woo, it will just jam with my system and I can't follow along with processes. It loses me. I need something that feels a little more grounded in the like intellectual, in the science and things like that. And I totally have my woo-woo spiritual side as well. And I developed this tool specifically to like really bridge these two worlds in a way that we know works with the nervous system. The neuroscience is here to back it up. This is a very trauma-informed method, and it's one that's really practical. And I really want to say that this tool, once I mastered it, really changed the trajectory of my life. It felt like for the first time I was able to finally partner with my body and my nervous system rather than being in this constant fighting and resisting of it. This tool has allowed myself and my clients to really explore some of the biggest, deepest, darkest, intense emotional spaces and parts of ourselves that otherwise felt untouchable, that otherwise would send myself or my clients into a freeze response or a trauma response. This is something that makes that unconscious side of things accessible. Now, I'm sharing this process, which is called the aware process, in a silo here on this episode. It does fit into the whole self-integration method. If you have not listened to that episode where I go through the 4 steps of the whole self-integration method process, I believe it was back in October that I did that. So you can just search back. It's in the title. If you haven't listened to that one yet, then one, I definitely encourage you to go back and listen. You don't have to listen to it first or anything like that for it to make sense. But this really falls into step 3 in the introspective inventory. This is when we are looking inwards to learn about, to discover, to examine the imprints that have been left on our nervous system, whether it is from our own life, from passed down from generations, or even just passed on from the collective experience around us. Our nervous system gets these imprints on it that then impact the way we interact with the world. And when these are left unexamined, it often feels like you are moving through life in ways that might feel like they're keeping you stuck, where it feels like your own worst enemy, where you feel like maybe you're constantly self-sabotaging, you have the best intentions, and then it's like, you wake up and next thing you know, you procrastinate the whole day away, or maybe you're engaging in habits that you know aren't beneficial and you know you want to shift and you just can't seem to shift them, definitely time to use the aware process to examine the imprints that have been left in your nervous system that are creating those habits. Now, we can also use the aware process on pretty much any emotion or sensation that comes up. You can use the aware process directly on your pain itself. And one of my favorite things to use the aware process on, so don't forget this one, is on resistance. So I will tell people, if you are resistant to doing this very process, you can actually aware process that resistance. And yes, I get that is pretty obnoxious, but it works. It's like, ooh, what is the resistance about? This is where you get to discover, why is it present? What is being held in the unconscious? I recommend not getting too caught up in like, oh, what can I use it on? Or what should I not use it on? It works on a really wide variety of things, and it helps to bring in clarity. So different things will respond differently, and you might get different outcomes depending on what you're using the aware process for. But as you'll see as we go through it, there is a lot of flexibility in it. And yes, it's going to yield very different outcomes if you are working through a specific emotion that had something that's held in the nervous system behind it, and there's a clear story and path forward, versus something that was handed down intergenerationally. It might require then more to it. So there are some things I want to say that, as much as the aware process is one of my most foundational tools, it is my go-to for so many things, it is not the only tool. There are many tools within the Pain to Power program, and there are certain patterns and trauma responses, especially things like intergenerational trauma or core woundings, that are going to need then more clarity. So I have another process, for instance, called the Evolve process, which we often may need to go into that from the aware process. But you actually don't need to know any of that right now, because the aware process alone will provide you so much clarity, and clarity on if there is more needed. Now, I have one caveat of what not to do with the aware process. I love to think about the aware process as it's like mining for information that is held in the unconscious. It is a really great way to discover what your nervous system is holding onto. Once it is discovered, I do not recommend using the aware process on the same pattern over and over and over again. Not going to go into too much detail today, just because it can be a more complex topic and there's a lot of nuance around it. But we have some core wounding patterns that we might discover and learn about through the aware process, and really bring them into this conscious awareness that is going to give you so much more clarity and understanding. And I cannot tell you how much having a deeper understanding and being able to just validate yourself in the process, because there's a lot of validation that can happen through the aware process, is healing in itself. There are absolutely many things that just taking it through the aware process is the healing. The healing happens just by doing it. It will happen organically. By doing the aware process. And if it feels like there's something that is deep and it keeps coming up, once you understand the root, all the aware process will do is will kind of just keep showing you the same root over and over again, but it's there's going to be other steps that you have to take. So once you understand where a pattern's coming from, and maybe you now have some evidence because it's come up a few times and the aware process itself has not been enough to shift it, then don't keep doing it, because then you'll just drive yourself crazy with it. So that's my one caveat with it. When the aware process in itself is not enough to heal, then often you are moving into different tools, and that's all outlined in the Pain to Power program. Okay, but let's get back into what this process can do for you, because it is seriously life-changing. Another episode to go back to is the one that talks about the overcoupling reactions. And that is when we have a response to a scenario that is not right-sized for the scenario. So let's use a silly example right now. Let's say someone cuts you off and you just explode with anger. There is so much anger that comes out of you. it's pretty obvious in that moment where it's like, this isn't about the car cutting you off. Like, yeah, that's annoying, but like the amount of anger is not matched up right to this scenario, right? Especially if it was like, fine, you saw it, no one got hurt, like, okay, right? I think we all have that where our reaction is really oversized. That is almost always because our nervous system is carrying something from the past that needs to be released. Now, the aware process can help determine that. So let's say that exact situation happens. You have all this anger come out, and let's say you're noticing this anger, just kind of this just general agitation at everything, right? Like you're snapping at your kids, you're snapping at your husband. You have determined, though, that you have eaten the snacks that you need and drinking water, and you have slept, and it's just like you are just constantly snapping, right? And this anger is overflowing. So it'd be great to aware process. What is this really about? What is here? What is underneath this, right? Because when we can understand that it's not related to what is the individual things that are happening in our life, which sure, again, some of them might be annoying, but the amount of anger isn't correct, then we can move this through and not just keep getting stuck in the same repetition of it. Now, I want to say another really specific thing to aware process, which is a game changer for chronic pain. So listen closely. If you have chronic pain, which you likely do if you are listening to this podcast, one of the best things to aware process is how you feel about your pain, not the pain itself. Although you can aware process your pain, I find that is often it works for some people. A lot of people jam up if that's the first place you're trying to go to. What I recommend doing is ask yourself, how do I feel about my pain? And then aware process that. So if you are angry about it, aware process the anger towards your pain. If your pain elicits a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, aware process the anxiety, the fear. Okay? So, and the other caveat here is the aware process does require a general capacity to be with some intensity of emotion that comes up. So if you are someone who does not feel like they don't have if you are someone who feels like you don't have that capacity, well, one, I want to say in the Pain to Power program, I walk you through how to build that nervous system safety, how to start building that capacity. But one of the easiest ways that I can just share with you here is to just start with something that's way smaller. Don't start really diving deep into something that is really big and elicits a really big emotional reaction. Start with something small. Start with like, oh, wow, I'm surprised at how agitated I got when my, kid just wouldn't share his toy with his sister. Like that just led this like tension in my stomach. And it's something that it's like, it's there. You could probably ignore, but like you notice it, right? It's like start with smaller things that aren't eliciting this massive reaction, because this tool is a skill. It is a skill that you will learn. And like any skill, you don't start with the hardest, most complex version of it. Again, like I've said, it is ridiculous to start with scuba diving if you don't know how to swim. So start with something small. All right. Now, time to get into it. So if you have not guessed already, AWARE is an acronym. Makes it really easy to remember. I'm going to first go through, tell you what each letter means, and then I will go through them in more detail. So A stands for awareness. The W stands for witness your felt sense. The A is ask with curiosity. The R is reorient the nervous system. And E, embrace yourself. All right, let's get into more detail about each one. And within the Pain to Power program, I do have a guided process that takes you through these and is kind of taking you through each one by one, so you don't have to remember each step. So if that's something that you feel like you want more guidance around, because sometimes it can be a lot to try to communicate with your nervous system while remembering each step, but then that's all included in the program, as well as, a PDF and a guide that it takes you through it. So A, awareness. The power of this step cannot be understated. Just becoming aware at a greater level is massively beneficial. When you can be aware from a third-party perspective, this outside observer of yourself, and just witnessing what's happening, it really starts to shift the way we are looking at things. So I love to imagine myself just pulling back and hanging out above my own head and just having this broad view of what is actually happening here. Awareness gives you the space to look at versus being consumed. And more often than not, what happens is we get consumed by an emotion. It just takes over. It hijacks our system. And once it has hijacked us, we cannot attend to it. Now, here's the good news, is you can pull in awareness after you're hijacked. It's not like, oh, you've been hijacked, so it's too late. No, not at all. Bringing awareness to, wow, my system is absolutely flooded and hijacked with rage, with, irritation, with fear, with anxiety, with numbness, with frozenness, right? It's this moment in time that is captured of I can see that I am flooded and hijacked. I'm just noticing that. I am just noticing. I'm noticing that I am experiencing pain and my fear just went from 0 to 100. Nothing needs to change. In this step, it is solely awareness. Might be I am aware that I have a massive amount of resistance, that I want to stop, that I want to push this away, that I want to stop listening, right, and just get out. It is just stating what is present. And if possible, if it's available to you, I highly recommend stating it out loud. I am hijacked. I'm oh my God, I want this to stop, right? Of just bringing words to it. I am feeling immense anger, right? This is the name it to tame it. Falls into this awareness step. If you've ever heard that expression, it is just naming the emotion that is present. If it's available, sometimes in this step, you don't even know the emotion yet. It might just be I am hijacked and I don't even know what's happening. Everything is spinning, right? And that's totally fine too, because we'll get more clear in the second step. But it is just bringing that awareness. It might be, and this is a really common one for chronic pain, I am feeling incredibly unsafe right now. There is a lack of safety. Now, with this one, I do want to bring in, if there is a lack of safety, if you are aware that your body is almost in this life or death type of reaction, I recommend in this awareness, bringing in safety, bringing in grounding. Now, if you don't know how to do that, again, I teach that within the Pain to Power program. I talk about that in the nervous system safety episode of how to start bringing in safety, even when it feels like it's not accessible. So I'm not going to cover that here. It is a big one, but I do want to just bring that caveat in. If there's a complete feeling of unsafety, it feels very life or death, in this awareness, then there's kind of a sub-stage of bringing safety first before going into the next steps. It will help a lot. And it might just be as simple as literally looking around and being I'm not being attacked. There are no saber-toothed tigers. I am not going to die in this moment, right? That right there might be enough, or you might need a little bit more. All right, because if any of those trees shouldn't be listening to this podcast right now, right? You shouldn't be trying to do inner work if you're really about to die. That would be ridiculous. Okay. So A is for awareness. Then the W. W is witnessing your felt sense. Now, with this witnessing is done best when it is done with a wonder-driven mind, when it is done with curiosity and compassion. And in the master class that I just did, I will link it below, I talk more about how to come into this wonder-driven mind state if that is something that is new to you, that it is really essential for this step. Now you might be wondering, what is your felt sense? Your felt sense is simply the sense that you are feeling, right? It is a bodily experience where we are locating what the body is experiencing. Now, it can take some time to form, and it's already likely has formed in that awareness step, but sometimes it just might take a moment to settle in. This is not a process to be rushed. It requires intention. It requires a slowing down. And it is in this step where we really make the subconscious become conscious. Do not skip this step, because if you don't create the connection here, then when you go to the next step, when you start to gain clarity from your subconscious, you won't get answers to your questions. So how do you really witness your felt sense? If you have ever heard of somatic tracking, which I know a lot of people in the chronic pain world are familiar with, if you're not familiar with, don't worry about it. It's not my term. I'll just use it because it's a familiar one. But somatic tracking is very, very similar to this step. It's the exact same concept because this is the neuroscience behind how we make the subconscious conscious. And so this is noticing where in your body, or even outside of your body, by the way. Sometimes that's the first, thing to notice is, am I even experiencing this in my body or is this outside of my body? That this experience is happening. You're asking, what is the color, the location, the shape, the texture, the size? Where are its borders? Are there clear borders to it? Is this like an object that you're feeling in your chest, right? Is it a cube that is a perfect cube and has very clear, crisp borders? Or is it this fuzzy sensation that is melting outward and, going into your shoulders and then wisping away? Is it in multiple areas? Is it your chest and your belly, right? And if any of them don't have a clear answer, it's totally fine. Maybe you're really clear in its color, but you're like, I have no idea what shape it is. It's totally fine. Just answer what you can. And some people are going to have just different senses that they connect more to. Some might notice that it has a sound to it, for instance, or even a smell. Maybe you notice the density of it. Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it like fog? Or is it like hard metal? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is there a temperature to it? Is it solid, liquid? Or maybe just are starting to describe it as if you were describing it so someone could paint it or draw it. Or if you are someone who senses things a lot more with, sense of smell or hearing, then that's fine to describe it that way as well. But it's like you are explaining to somebody else what you are experiencing. Now, everyone experiences things differently. Some people have really clear images in their mind. They're incredibly visual. If you're like me, you might just have more of a knowing. Like, I can describe things with a lot of detail, but I'm like not actually seeing them. I just know that's what they look like. It might feel like you're just making stuff up, and that is perfect. That is like the biggest thing I hear my clients say. They're like, when they're new to this process, they're like, am I just making this up? I'm like, yeah, probably. It's great. Perfect. It is literally your brain trying to access the subconscious. And in order to access it, it has to have some type of representation of it that it can understand. And so, yeah, there kind of is an element that you are not making it up, but you are describing it in a way that makes sense to you, right? I don't think it's by accident that, for instance, if I have a client that's like really into Harry Potter, that they tend to describe things almost as like Harry Potter characters, right? Or if there's someone who's really, into animals, they almost have more of an animal sense around it because it's what your brain understands. And that's all that has to happen. That's totally fine. And it works. It 100% works. So I just want to be like, full permission if it feels like you're making it up. Just go with it. The fact that your brain is creating this image is significant. Go with it. Okay. And in this process, also, one thing I wanted to say about the visual is some people will have a lot of personification. So maybe you are actually seeing a younger version of yourself, for instance. Maybe you are seeing your parents or someone that you know, or maybe it's just like a person. Again, just go with it. I recommend not overthinking any of this right now. Just go with what you see. You can be like, oh, look, there's my mom. Cool. Okay. Right? Let all preconceived notions and assumptions fall away. This is so important. And here is where I see people get the most tripped up in this type of work. And it is far more of a significant problem for those who have done a lot of talk therapy or a lot of healing work. Maybe they've done a lot of inner child work, things like that, where they've really done a lot of analytical explorations of their childhood, of trauma, or they have an understanding of it. What I see are people starting to attach what they already know to this. So they'll be like, oh, I'm seeing, I'm seeing a younger version of myself. Oh, that must be when I experienced this trauma. Or, oh, this must be when I was abandoned by my dad. If what is coming up around this is any type of language that is therapy language, that is like that type of attachment style language or anything there, I would back up and be like, you are making assumptions and you are putting on preconceived notions, and no judgment of that. It's just noticing it. It is fascinating how many times people who deeply, like I have worked with therapists, right? People who really understand this stuff, they will stay stuck because they are just trying to apply what they know from a therapy sense, and it gets in the way. Every now and then they're correct, I will say, and they go through the process and they're like, yeah, it's right. And it is right. And you can tell when it is. More often than not, I would say 75% of the time, when people go in with preconceived notions to this process, they are incorrect. And when you are holding on to and attached to what you think something means, then you will not allow what is truly there to speak, and you will stay stuck. So in this step, it is just noticing. Here's this random fireball in my chest that is here. It feels really hot, and it makes me want to scream and explode with anger. Or, oh, look, there is a knife that is stabbed through my back. It feels like it's going in my spine and out my stomach. Cool, right? Like, it could be kind of graphic like that. Or maybe that's just me. And it's just being like, oh, okay. And you can bring in some playfulness here, by the way, of like looking down and being like, oh, look, there's not actually a knife there. It just feels like it, right? And so in this step, after you have defined it, I'm going to really encourage you to pause before the next step and just breathe with it. There's often a rush to get into the next step, but pause here and breathe. Sometimes just pausing and breathing with this is literally all you need. You might not even need to go into the next one. I would recommend at least 5 deep breaths. And if you start to feel it melting away, keep breathing before going into the next one. Literally, you get to 10, it might be gone. And you didn't even need to go more. And when you have breathing with it, even if it still stays present and doesn't shift, beautiful. Then we get to go with the next one, and it's going to be so much more settled, and you will get clearer answers because you have taken the time to settle and be and witness it fully before rushing into it. So the next is another A. That is ask with curiosity. This is where you get to bring in a little bit of that analytical mind. Now, just make sure you're not analyzing the answers, but based on the answers you get, you do get to use your analysis and your intelligence to pick the next question you're asking, for instance. Because the questions you ask and the answers you get do require, this is where a lot of nuance can happen and a lot of directions can go with this process. Now, I'm going to be teaching the kind of most basic, straightforward way through this process, but if there's something that you feel like you're jamming up with, or you feel like you don't know what to do with, or you feel like you've taken it through the aware process and you're like, I don't even know what to do with these answers I got, then that is likely because there's something there that just needs a little bit more finessing or a different tool. But this is where you gain that information. And that's something, again, that we can go through individually or learn in the Pain to Power program. So I recommend always, always, always starting with the question, how do I feel towards this being here? So let's say I described, I said there's like a fire in my chest. First, it's like, ooh, how do I feel about this fire in my chest being here? Or maybe it's like that, knife through my back. How do I feel about it being here? And if you were like, I fucking hate it, then there's going to be a tension there. And understandably so, no judgment. But often first we have to come to a place of neutrality or curiosity with this part, because you want to ask with curiosity. It is essential. Ask with curiosity. You cannot ask with hatred. You can try, it just won't work, right? And if you've ever been in a conversation with maybe a spouse or something and they're coming at you and they're like, why wasn't the dishwasher closed? Or, you know what I mean? And they have that like agitation in their voice. You're going to feel really attacked. You're going to shut down versus like, oh, hey, is there a reason that you didn't start the dishwasher last night? You're going to be like, oh, I just totally forgot, right? And you'll just like be really honest and straightforward. Versus when you feel attacked, that's when you start shutting down, maybe even lying, trying to cover it up and whatnot. And our parts are going to do the same thing. So if we are coming at them with resentment, with resistance, with anger, with hatred, then understandable, we might need to just be like, hey, anger, I see you here. Can you please take a step back? I know we're angry at this. Or I know we don't want this knife to be here through our back. I get it. Can you just step aside right now? And if those parts won't step aside, you can kind of actually start over with the aware process and start with them. But often just ask it to step aside. They often do. And we'll just go with that for right now. So when we're asking with curiosity, there are some basic questions that I love to ask pretty much everything. And then again, you can modify the questions or ask more based on the answers you get. So one of the next questions I love to ask is, how old do I feel right now? Or how old is this part? Or how old is this emotion? Or how old is this fireball inside my chest? Right? Be like, how old are you? How long have you been here for? And just let it answer. Now, often if it answers an answer that's older than you, if it's like, I've been here for 1,000 years, it's a pretty telltale sign that that part is not fully yours. It was passed down. And then you can ask and even confirm of like, how much of you are even mine? And especially if the part is not older than you, so maybe it's like, oh, I've been with you for 5 years, you can still ask, how much of you is mine, right? Are you even mine? And you can ask it, and I often get the answer in percentages. So it might be like 100% mine, or 50%, or 0%. And that can tell you a lot, because if it's not yours, or if a large chunk of it isn't yours, then it is not yours to process. And it's something that even if it hasn't been with you that long, it still can be handed to you via intergenerational trauma or just from the collective. So that is one of the base questions to answer, because I think it's really important to know how much is truly and authentically yours first before getting the answers to the rest of the questions. And then you can say, what are you here for? What are you here for? And let it answer. And then you could also ask, what do you think would happen if you weren't here? Let it answer. Now, usually people will start analyzing, start overthinking things here. And again, if you start feeling yourself answer in a full sentence, or there is therapy language or any of that, that is your brain doing the talking. Allow the part to answer. The part is almost always going to speak softly and in very, very short, concise phrases like, here to protect you. What do you think would happen if I wasn't here? You'd die, right? Like, it's going to be like that. Pretty, like, disaster would happen. And then you can get more clarity if you want from it. But if you're hearing long, rational answers or things that are just super logical, then I would check that. Now, those are some of my favorite questions. And then based on those, again, you can ask other ones, or maybe you can get more information. You can sometimes ask like, hey, like, oh, what are the other questions? Actually, let me say this one is, how old do you think I am? So you're asking the part how old it thinks you are. So maybe you're 45 and the part's like, I think you're 6. That's a great indication that this part is treating you like a small child, that it's protecting you as if you were a small child, or it's acting as if you were a small child, right? Which there's going to be then a huge issue there. And so that is fantastic information. And in things like that, that's often where we go into the evolve practice, because we have to help the part evolve when it thinks you are a child. Now, again, this is not something where logic comes in. You are just listening. And you're listening with compassion, you're listening with curiosity, and none of it has to make sense. Like, literally, I recommend like thinking of this as like a story that is being told to you, and you can just listen with like fascination. And the more you can not get caught up in, is that even true? Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe you think that, or why would you do that, right? The better this process is going to work. Because sometimes you might get parts, again, if they're handed down from generations, they might say things that don't feel true to you, because of course not, because it's not yours, right? Like, it might be like, well, you know, you're a woman, and again, not that I would say it into this lengthiness, but as you gather more information, you might maybe get the information from a part where it's like, I'm trying to protect you because if you speak up as a woman, then you'll die. And like, that's just not true anymore, right? It's operating off old information. But if you just get mad at the part, it doesn't change the fact that it's present and it's getting in your way, right? So again, that's where the evolve process helps to update the part. So, but when we can just sit back and listen with curiosity, we'll get so much more information and clarity. And again, based on the answers, you get to ask more questions. All right. So once you have learned about what your nervous system is holding, what is being held in your subconscious, you should already have so much more clarity on what is going on and what is getting in your way. So then you're going to go into R. That is reorienting the nervous system. You want to show it that you are an adult. Show this part. And you can go ahead and do this no matter what the part answered. It's just a reorientation to the current date, your current place, your current situation, your current age, and your current level of safety, which this is really important that we are talking about the nervous system safety that I have defined as such. So go back and listen to that if you're not sure. Not a definition of safety that's not serving you, right? If you're like, I'm not safe, then I would listen to the nervous system safety episode first. You are just updating to what is true and the safety resources you have. That might be like, I have access to food. And again, even if money is tight or you don't currently have food in your fridge, you can help it show, and this is just all in your mind's eye, like, hey, look, they have a grocery store down the street that I can go to. You can friggin' order Grubhub if you're starving right now, right? Like, we have an abundance of access to food. Even if it feels like, well, money's a little tight and I'm on a budget, we still have access to food. Like, you're not going to starve. There are ways to access it through all types of resources, for instance. Maybe you're showing that you have access to transportation, your own car, or that there's public transportation, or whatever it might be, that you have a roof over your head. If you have people who care about you, if you have a spouse that helps to take care of you, or a partner, or a good friend, or family that you can fall back on, it's just reorienting it to all these things that are currently true for you. And again, don't forget to update it to your current age, very often parts think that you are younger than you are. And so just updating them to your age and also anything maybe you've learned that feels relevant. So let's say, I'm going to use a client example here. I had a client who, when she was about 20 years old, she had some really, really significant depressive episodes that took her out of work, sent her back to her parents' house, and, something that she almost had to get hospitalized for, and was a very low point in her life. And so when we started working together, she was extremely terrified of going back into this. But the truth is she had developed so many nervous system regulation tools, emotional processing, not to mention that her and I were working together, so it's something that I could guide her through, that she had so many more resources that even if that happened again, she now had the tools to move through it. She'd already been through it, right? So it's even reorienting it to that, hey, and pain is a great example of that. If you've had a pain flare up before, you might just show your system, hey, I've lived through this. Maybe I don't even know how to get out of it, but I've lived through it. It's not going to kill me because I'm still here, right? It's just showing it like, hey, you know what? Yeah, my back hurts. It sucks. I still don't exactly know what to do, but we will survive. And it's just reorienting it in that way. All right. At this point, it's great to open your eyes towards the end of this, start looking around and literally seeing the safety around you, reorienting from being, deep connected to your subconscious. You're reorienting to your surroundings, maybe really feeling your feet on the floor, putting your hands on the ground or on a desk on something firm and solid. And then moving into the E, which is embracing yourself. Now, do not skip this step. So many people want to just get up and be like, okay, cool, I did it. And I will say this step is hard for me too. Okay, if you were not used to this, it is a tough step and it is a game changer. And it is a step that when you are including it really, really makes a significant difference in reprogramming your nervous system for the long haul. You want to take the time to thank yourself, to thank the parts that showed up and spoke to you, and just to show your gratitude and to just take this moment to acknowledge, like, wow, I was with this and I did this, and I was with maybe some intensity or maybe something that felt scary, and I am here. Like, thank you, self. Like, that's pretty awesome. And so one of my favorite ways to do this, because it does help to also integrate it into your nervous system better, is to cross your arms. So you're kind of creating an X with your arms. So one hand is on each of the opposite arms, and you can butterfly tap. And this is a technique from EMDR, I believe. You're tapping one at a time, alternating. Okay. And then I always start with a tapping and then move into rubbing up and down, like a hug in a really soothing way of oh, thank you for doing that. That's amazing. We did it. We're safe. This is awesome. This really helps, again, integrate it into your nervous system to help build safety around being with intensity of emotions. And it just gives you some space to shift out of speaking to your subconscious and being back into your conscious mind and open back up to the world around you in a really beautiful way that is going to, again, help this process move you forward versus being something that you kind of pop out of so fast that it just doesn't settle in and embody as well. All right. And so that is the aware process. A for awareness, W for witnessing your felt sense, A for ask with curiosity, R for reorient the nervous system, and E, embrace yourself. Again, this process has been an absolute game changer for myself and for my clients. And I know sometimes it can jam, it can feel weird to do on your own, or maybe you don't quite know what to do next. And that is why the Pain to Power program is here to guide you through all the different nuances or things that could come up in the process. But go ahead, try it out. Let me know what you tried it with and how it went. I would absolutely love to hear. And if it's jamming up in any way, then email me and let's see if I can give you the best next steps, or how to work that out, or maybe a different question to ask that you didn't think of that can give you that clarity you need, that healing you need to move forward so you can have more ease, less pain, and more joy and more fulfillment in your life. All right, I am so excited for you to try it out. I would love to hear how it goes. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend who could also use it, and also give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. That helps others find information like this, and it is so appreciated. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye.